Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome to the channel, and today we're going to be watching some gameplay of the Merkava 4M while I give you some general tips and tricks for the Merkava 4 series of tanks. They're Israel's top-of-the-line tanks, and they're pretty fun to play in my opinion, so let's get into it. Now, one thing I do want to cover before we get into full gameplay is actually the armor profile of the Merkava. Not just the 4s, but also the family as a whole, because there are some weird features of these tanks that you kind of have to understand. So one of the big things is that the Merkavas use a lot of internal compartmentalization and internal bulkheads to kind of limit damage. And this creates a weird scenario where your objective isn't most of the time to get through the external armor, but rather you need to get through the external armor and get through a bulkhead in a way that will generate shrapneling to take out the crew. Because the internal bulkheads will actually stop that initial shrapneling, and you're going to create new shrapneling off of the bulkhead. And this new shrapneling off of the bulkhead that you hit is also kind of inconsistent. So if you've ever seen Merkavas where they're just taking hit after hit after hit and don't seem to die, and you can't really tell why, it's probably because people are trying to aim their shrapneling off of the armor on the outside and not thinking about the bulkheads on the inside, which is actually where the shrapnel is going to originate from. Now, when we're looking at the turret on the surface doesn't seem that potent in terms of its protection. Obviously, the breach is a weak point, but that's a weak point on every top tier tank, so that's not really notable. But these giant blocks of composite armor that you see on the outside don't seem to offer that much protection, except it's kind of deceptive. These blocks of armor on the outside are full of a lot of empty space, and the internal turret is actually a lot smaller than it looks, like the turret itself, not these giant blocks on the outside. So it's very easy to hit this turret and do literally no damage. And it's actually pretty uncommon, or at least it has been all the games that I've done spading the Merkava 4s so far, to actually take serious damage to a hit, to the turret, from a hit that wasn't through the breach. Like, I don't actually recall that ever happening. So the turret looks weaker than it really is. It has some janky angles, it kind of screws with shells because of volumetric, and also it just has a ton of empty space. But there's a really lesser known feature of the Merkava that we're going to look at right now, and that you kind of need to know if you're playing it and if you're playing against it, and that is this block of armor right here. So this piece of composite armor that runs along the upper side of the hull is, from what I can tell, nobody really knows about it. I haven't had anybody try to shoot around it, and I have had a lot of people sink shells into it without realizing exactly how thick it is, or even that it's there. So the effective protection flat on for this armor is around 250 for kinetic, 250 millimeters for a kinetic round. So if you have something like a 2S38 with one of the highest penning autocannons in the game, it can't break through this armor belt on the side. Against chemical rounds, it's like anywhere between 4 and 600, depending on what specific part you hit. So a lot of heat as fast rounds can't go through that piece of armor at all. And the crew is also situated pretty high in the turret, so if you want to get the crew, a lot of times you have to shoot through that belt, because if you try to shoot under it, the shrapneling won't actually go up into them. And there's another weird feature. This is a piece of advice I won't give you for any other top tier tank, but you can actually angle the Merkavas, or at least the 4s. Because if you angle the Merkava 4, now if the opponent tries to shoot high and into the turret crew, they're actually going to just have the shell skid along that piece of composite armor and do no damage. In the armor simulation, you can see I'm using DM53, and it's doing literally nothing to this part of the tank. So if you angle, your opponent actually has to shoot a little lower than normal if they want to get your commander and your gunner. And this does throw people off, and it can eat shells, but it's not in any way consistent, and I think that's the theme with the Merkava's armor. And while this consistency can be frustrating, it does work in your favor as much as it works against you. Now, I do want to address the elephant in the room in terms of the ammo I'm using. You probably noticed I'm only using 11 rounds. So this is kind of an odd choice, and it might be a little bit of paranoia on my part, but if we look at the Merkava ammo storage, in the back of the turret we have a 10-round mechanized ammo rack that's only behind the loader. So that almost never gets hit, because your opponent would have to punch straight through your turret, kill your loader, and punch through the ammo door and kill them. Like, it never gets touched. The other ammo storage is in the hull to the left and right in the back of the tank. Now, the hull ammo storage is in protected bins. Like, it has a form of fireproof armor around it, so it doesn't generally get taken out by shrapneling, but it can get taken out by direct hits. And we kind of talked about that strip of armor on the side earlier in the video, and that strip of armor on the side forces enemies to aim low, and especially if they're kind of raking the side with an autocannon, that ammo in the back is a weak point. So even though it doesn't happen that often, I am paranoid enough that I kind of just stopped taking the ammo beyond what is in the mechanized ammo rack, and then one in the chamber, which is a total of 11 rounds. It is small, and honestly, you could probably get away with running 15 or 20 without any real problems, because even if the enemy's shooting you in normal places, they're not generally going to hit that ammo in the back. And if you're getting hit by like main battle tanks like T-80s, Abrams, Leopards, you're not really going to run into any like major issues with that most of the time. But I am paranoid enough, and it has saved me enough not having any ammo in the back, that I do just kind of run a mere 11 rounds, which admittedly is kind of light. One extra thing I do want to address about ammo, if you ask me, like, do I regret only bringing APF SDS rounds or armor-piercing fin stabilized discarding salvos? The answer is generally no. You can see in this scenario we have a 4-rack bus just like driving along, and you think, you know, the timed HE shells that are available to the Merkavas would be really useful. But it turns out they're kind of not. The problem is, by range finding a target, you set the range whether you want to or not, even if you're just trying to land an accurate shot at distance. And even something as lightly armored as this can actually take near hits from those high explosive shells pretty well, which is kind of disappointing. I do kind of wish I had a heat FS for this, but it's not the worst. It's not the end of the world. In terms of mobility, I haven't really found the Merkava to be all that sluggish. When I first got them, I thought this is a 65-ton tank. Also, I don't have any of the upgrades researched. I thought it was going to be as slow as the Merkava 3 that I had just finished spading, and it turns out it really wasn't the case. The Merkava has good acceleration, it has a pretty good power to weight ratio, and it has the same speed forward and reverse. Additionally, it also has nothing blocking the turret from shooting over the back or sides of the tank. Like, it doesn't have an engine deck like you have on something like an Abrams that limits your gun depression over the back. So you can just kind of use this like an ambidirectional tank and just reverse into encounters, which is really good if you're in close quarters and you have to respond very quickly to something, or if you're on a ridge line and you have to like move back and forth rapidly, where it's not super important putting your armor towards your opponent, but it is super important being able to get a shot off quickly. And here you see a super helpful moment where a teammate, while we're trying to capture a point, decides to pop smoke. We have like 3 or 4 vehicles in this area. We're watching all possible like lines of sight they could use to poke out and fire shots from. If anybody pokes, we could just like shoot them in the face and kill them. We don't actually need smoke here. And this is one of the big things that is a pet peeve of mine with a lot of newer players. They just kind of smoke at the wrong times, and they do so in a way that blinds their teammates and helps out the enemy almost more than it helps you. Especially considering that smoke is kind of like the person looking into the smoke has an inherent advantage over the person trying to look out of the smoke because of the way the shadows work. And since we're blind, let's go ahead and take this opportunity to talk about the Merkava's smoke grenade system. So the Merkava has the standard battery of smoke grenade launchers that you're going to see on most top tier MBTs, and you'll fire them essentially in pairs until you run out of them, and it will create a very solid smoke screen very quickly in front of you. However, the Merkava does have, and this is all Merkavas have this, not just the 4, but the 3, the 2, and the 1 as well, a smoke grenade launcher poking out of the roof of the vehicle. Now, this smoke grenade launcher actually comes stock. You can use it right away with no upgrades. Although it's not as effective, it kind of lobs it in an anemic arc and it takes it a little while to like actually detonate. But it does give you the option to smoke stock, which is pretty unique, and most top tier tanks can't do that at all. Additionally, once you run out of your main battery of smokes, you'll start firing the smaller smokes. You'll actually start firing the smaller smokes while you're firing the main battery because it doesn't let you select which type of launcher, or at least I haven't found a way to. So you'll actually see your big smoke screen go up, and then you'll see a smaller smoke grenade detonate like a little bit past it, but anyway. This does mean that even if you deplete your main smokes, you still have an option to kind of conceal vision if you want to get away from something, or if you need to hide yourself from a helicopter or a drone. So it's a really nice feature. And here we're kind of heading out off point, and somebody pokes the ridgeline and they hit us. And I can't immediately tell based on my position exactly where they are, even on thermals. And I kind of give this a second to make sure I can't return fire before I pop smoke, and also to make sure I don't have any teammates that I'm getting in the way of. And sure enough, a teammate does actually save me, because it turns out, as I said earlier, we had more than enough guns. We didn't actually need to pop smoke back when we were sitting on point. This is also kind of a handy time to bring up the laser warning system, which is probably my favorite defensive system. It doesn't help you that much against enemy tanks, but it does help a lot against things like drones and helicopters, where their missiles have a much higher flight time. And while you do get the nice little laser incoming flashing red text on the front of the screen, you also see in your compass, you will see a directional indicator telling you where the laser is coming from, which is handy because sometimes teammates will laze you, and it's also important to know where the enemy is lasing you from. Now here you can see we're kind of moving out to get a position on this ridge line, because what we want to do is we're going to try to engage the enemy at off angles. That is to say, when the enemy comes from their spawn and is looking at B or C, we want to be at an angle so far off to the side that they won't immediately look at us unless they know we are there. And these kind of off-angle positions are fantastic at top tier, because honestly, getting shot at top tier is a huge risk no matter how good your tank is. So here you can see we have kind of an awkward fight where there's an enemy light tank that's scouted, they're also smoking, and we don't have any vision on them, and we don't know what type of light tank it is, and it could be any number of them. But we don't actually need to push the light tank. Like, trying to push it could result in us exposing ourselves to too many different angles, and we already have control over B and C. We have good sight lines, both of those, we can watch anybody going after them. So even though we don't have a good way to push this particular light tank, we don't really need to push this light tank. Like, we can win the game without ever firing at them, as long as we hold this position. And that's one thing that I think it's undervalued at both low and high tiers, is understanding when you don't need to do anything and when your opponent does. Like, if the impetus is on your opponent to do something, you can just kind of chill. So we found out this was a Dardo light tank from the kill feed, and what we're going to do is we're going to essentially use our trophy system to try and push it. The trophy system is a hard kill system that will automatically try and intercept any missiles the opponents fire at you, and it can intercept some other projectiles as well. With the trophy system, my experience is that the first hit is free. Most enemies will try to guide their missile at you first without realizing that they can't hurt you, because most opponents are not used to fighting against these kind of hard kill systems. So you actually get your first shot basically free as the opponent's trying to guide a missile instead of trying to disable you, and their missile isn't going to do anything. However, in this particular encounter, we actually get a bit of a bad laze, or maybe it's some bad volumetric, I can't really tell. So we end up having to immediately back off. Fortunately, we have a really good reverse gear, so we can't do that. So you'll notice we're down to only 2 charges for our trophy system on the left-hand side, and if you're wondering why is it the left-hand side, it's because the 2 trophy systems actually overlap in the front and the back, although they overlap more in the front than in the back. But from the front, that means we effectively have 6 charges that can be used to intercept incoming missiles. Also, some useless trivia: the trophy only intercepts the missile if it's going to hit you, and I've encountered this a few times when helicopters are spamming rockets at me. So I wasn't 100% certain if it would intercept this top attack missile, but it turns out it does, so that was very convenient for me. Just as a side note, you can reload the trophy system on a cap, however it takes roughly a human lifespan just to reload, run, charge, so it's not really practical in most games. And here we're kind of showing the reverse gear and kind of the ambidirectional nature of the Merkava, and that we're just kind of reversing into shots because it's not really that important that we show our best armor, because the people at B and trying to cross don't really know we're there. So we are able to kind of shut down the push at B and around B and give our teammates some breathing room to recapture that point. Now here I'm starting to get a little twitchy because I haven't seen the Dardo in a while, and I know he knows where I am. And I start looking around, and sure enough, there he is. And you'll notice how I said when I was talking about trophy, the first hit is free. Well, one thing he definitely doesn't try to do this time is fire his missile at me. All he tries to do is disable me with his autocannon to try to go for guns and tracks and stuff. But of course, as we talked about, the strips of armor on the side actually protect our crew reasonably well. So he can't really kill us from this angle, at least not quickly, so he has to try and disable critical systems. At this point in the match, we've been watching the AB area for a while now, and we've been watching the cross. However, we have been a little distracted by the Dardo for some points, so it turns out one of the enemies did actually manage to make it to the point and start decapping it. And one thing is that right now we don't actually know what it is, and we're only down to 3 crew, so we don't really want to back into this. We definitely want to face forward towards the enemy. It turns out it's a BMP-2M, and our very first shot knocks out both his turret ring and his commander. He then proceeds to eject out, because that shot definitely wasn't enough to kill him. In fairness to the 2M, if he did know that we were a Merkava 4M, he probably doesn't win that fight 9 times out of 10, because we can't just push him. His missiles aren't going to kill us. At worst, they're going to knock out like our tracks, maybe our engine at the best. So we do win that fight most of the time, but it is a little weird that he J'd out, especially when the game is so close to being over. Overall, it was a pretty decent match, and I think it highlights enough of the selling points and even some of the limitations of the Merkava 4. Honestly, the biggest limitation the tank has that does get a little annoying is the reload is definitely on the long side for a top tier MBT. But overall, I didn't find myself disliking it at all. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite top tier MBTs, and in no small part, this is almost certainly due to the fact that the Merkava 4 and pretty much all the Merkava 4s have a very good for rank 1 APF SDS shell. They have the smoke launchers from the word go, so you basically only need to research like 3 upgrades and you have a fully functional MBT for top tier. And I do think that kind of ease of the spading process definitely left me more kindly disposed towards this than with something like, say, the M1 AIM, where your only ABF SDS is rank 3. But overall, I love the tank. I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoy your time with the Merkava 4M and all the other Merkavas. And if you did like the video and you felt it was educational, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps the channel. Have a nice day, everybody.